I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 3, 2, 1.
All right, here we are, West Point, Mississippi, home of Mossy Oak brand camo. It's a wonderful day. This is a podcast that I've looked forward to since we started podcasting.
Yes.
And we haven't been able to do this because COVID kind of shut
it did.
This one down.
Stephen didn't come over and see us very much.
No.
Yeah.
Which I understand.
I wasn't allowed to get back into the country.
Yeah, they had the gate closed, huh?
They had the gate closed, well and truly locked.
So we've got this wonderful guest today.
Absolutely.
Stephen Bennett. Can we hit the horns for Stephen, please? There we go, yeah.
There we go.
So he's with PGG Wrightson out of New Zealand, and we have been dealing with these guys
since day one.
For over 25 years. All the seed that comes for Biologic, all the New Zealand clovers and brassicas and chicory come from these guys, and they're just wonderful people. Scientists, seed scientists, and we've had this. We wanted you to sit right there so we could listen to this wonderful accent you have.
Well, thank you, Bobby. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, good day, mate.
Oh,
my God. Here we go.
Oh,
Did you bring your Crocodile Dundee hat?
Well, again, that's
a
the wrong
different country.
That's not a knife. This is a knife. Hey, but seriously, so these seeds that we got from PPG, the very first Biologic food plot blends were these seeds. It was a fall attract and a summer management and a premium perennial, right?
That is correct.
And this is where it all started.
And
and what, 98?
I remember it. Look, the bags that came in, the smaller bags looked like the vomit bags on the airplane.
Oh, they sure did. They had the paper and everything.
Yeah.
Well, we've come a long way, haven't we?
We got plastic now. But nonetheless, it's been a very long relationship, and a lot of people don't know. I was just telling Rob yesterday, about the science behind Biologic. This is where it's all based out of. So what these guys do, as far as raising venison and red stag and all that they do over there, that's the science and the technology that we have brought back to the States to use on whitetails. So.
It's a fascinating story, and I'd like to make sure we touch up base on all aspects of it. We need to be prepared. Mac's got a million questions.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
So, but let's just kind of slowly, methodically ease into this. Well, let me set the stage. So, Stephen looks like. Do you remember, like in the 11th grade, and you had a professor that was he always had a Bunsen burner, and he talked about the elements and all that. He kind of looks like that guy. But I
don't think he looks that nerdy.
I don't either.
When you drill into a conversation with him, he's really deep. He's going to be able to explain a lot of things in layman's terms to really help us understand it. So I'm
good.
Again, I'll say it, I'm really looking forward to this. And the COVID has prevented this from happening for the last couple of years. Stephen, guys would normally travel over this time of year. So for the last 25 years, y'all have come, except for during this COVID break.
Absolutely. I mean, we love being here because it's a great part of the world. You guys are doing a great job with our product, and so we like coming and having a chat and chewing the fat and seeing how things are growing.
Yeah, and bringing us some new seeds.
I think he really comes to go eat at Anthony's.
Oh, for sure.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
That's right.
But,
So in the background, you can hear Austin Delano laughing.
Our mad scientist.
Yeah, Austin.
He's doing field research this week.
I'm not sure. Rumor has it he missed a deer in the last couple of days.
Austin, what's up, buddy?
Well, it's heartbreaking is not really the right word for it, because it's a notch past that. But
it's worse than that.
It's just typical bow hunting in terrible conditions. Hot, and all of a sudden you get the right weather and you get a deer to act like you want him to, but we couldn't get him inside of 45 yards. So 47 and some wind, and I just didn't hit him. It's all it boils down to, man.
I gotcha. Well, we're sorry about that.
Yeah, I'll get over it in the next 30, 40 years.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was fixing to use the Mr. Fox quote, but you've obviously heard it before. You'll get over it in 30, 40 years.
So, I haven't been bow hunting in the last few days. Have you? I mean, we've been here.
Well, I think you have been bow hunting in the last few days from what everybody's saying. You're after an old pork chop, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
But I'm saying in the last
24 hours you haven't been.
Of the work week.
Okay. Well, you were bow hunting this weekend.
Yeah, the weekend.
So y'all are both bow hunting way more than me.
Well,
so don't act like the victim.
Oh, but you're the guy that's been on the tractor for the last 2 weeks.
I have been doing some serious game keeping. Now, there's no doubt about that. So, putting a lot of the PPG stuff in the ground around here. So, super excited about that.
So let's keep this moving along. So, blood on the Biologic. It's the time of year it's starting to happen.
They're starting to hit the ground. That's right. Except for Austin.
Did you see Did you see the deer Mark Jury killed?
I did not, but I heard he killed another monster.
He killed another monster.
You know, it's just like an expectation. You know, now. I mean, if he doesn't kill one, I would be let down.
That's what we need to do. If he doesn't kill one, we can tell everybody.
Yeah. So when
Mark Drury didn't get one,
we'll have a Mark didn't kill a big deer this year. Podcast.
This week.
I bet we don't get to have one.
Mac, you had a you were going to tell us about somebody?
Yeah, so one of all our friends, Ethan Strunk, ended up shooting about I think he said it was a 180-inch deer in 7/8.
Double brow tines, like the G2s on this thing are.
Is that right?
You were going to be very jealous.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you were going to be green.
Oh, it's a big deer, and
I don't know what this is.
One takeaway that I took from him is he said he shot the deer, thought he had a pretty good shot on it, found the blood, started following the blood, but then just had a feeling that, hey, I need to back out, and then he backed out, went in there the next morning and found the deer. So that is a good thing that he did that.
Yeah. That's a heck of a deer, that's for sure.
You ever had that feeling, Dudley, you need to back out? You need something.
I have that feeling a lot.
Yeah.
Not just with deer. Especially having you across the office from me.
Okay. All right. So, anything else? Blood on the Biologic? That's all I really noticed.
I think youth season's coming around, so there's going to be some blood on the Biologic here around here.
I hope so. Yeah. We're working on it. Little Dud missed one with his crossbow.
Oh, no.
It was really my fault. I misjudged the distance, and I assumed that the deer was going to duck, and the deer did not. And I told him to aim for the armpit, and the deer didn't drop at all.
And it went right under his
right under him.
Oh, man.
So, anyway.
I can show you some recent footage of that same thing that happened to a man.
Yeah. Hey,
is that the third excuse, Austin? I think so.
Oh, I've got 10 if you want to.
Wind, distance, not dropping.
Hot, cold. How's the crops look up there? Sorry.
Oh, it's been pretty rough up here. The drought's been, when you travel a little way from home, it just goes to show you how extensive it's been across, the whole middle section of the country, east and west side of the Mississippi River. And seeing the big rivers right now dry, and nothing but the channels with water in them is really eye-opening.
Yeah, it is.
It really is.
Well, we might get some rain down here this weekend.
Yeah, there's a good chance Saturday and a little bit of chance Sunday, so that's good. So, yeah, guys, and that's one thing that I'll go ahead and kind of start this talking about the biologic seed products that we get from you guys. They seem to be better adapted for surviving in drier conditions than most anything I've ever seen. And I'm speaking of the brassicas. I'm looking across at Steve, and he's nodding his head.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things we do in our selection process, Bobby. We do go for plants that are more resilient and tougher in dry environments. And, I mean, we sell a lot of seed into Australia. Australia is a very low rainfall country. And so we've got plants that have got to survive in that environment, and many of them do really well. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I've noticed this year with what's going on, a lot of the stuff that I planted germinated, and it was just hanging on, waiting for this next rain. But it held on through all that. It had a pretty good root system underneath the ground. So now that it's gotten a little moisture last weekend, I think we're
jumping.
Yeah, I think it'll be okay.
Yeah.
And that's indicative of what you're talking about.
Well, in particular with the Bioroa and the Spitfire, those forage rapes, that's what they do. They've got that ability to just hold in there when things are really dry. We see them in the summer at home, wilting and going purple and all those sorts of things, and then bang, you get a little bit of rain and off they go again, and they build some pretty big volume pretty quickly in the fall. Yeah.
It just reminds me, I'm always glad to plant, at least a third of my plots in brassicas.
Yes.
And you plant them early. If a lot of us hadn't done that this year, all the stuff, some of the blends that you may wait a little while to plant, I think we're all thankful that we got some brassicas in the ground, because that's really the only thing we have growing right now.
Yep.
And I've seen that across the board, north to south this year.
So look, let me start this by saying, because some of these younger listeners that may not have heard this story, but back over 25 years ago, when we met these guys from New Zealand, the Wrightson guys, at that point, your company was 100 years old. You were just a legendary seed company down there. But we learned that the New Zealand deer farmer, and that's a big industry in New Zealand. It's the number 2 industry in New Zealand. Tourism being number 1, deer farming being number 2. The New Zealand deer farmer is just like Lanny. He wants to grow a big deer with big antlers, because they sell all the meat they can grow into restaurants in Europe, and they sell the velvet antlers to the Asians. People like Dudley buy that for aphrodisiacs. Right. So they're wanting to grow big deer with big antlers.
That's right.
And so you guys have been working down there for a number of years to develop cultivars that worked the way a deer needs them to work, not necessarily a cow, because until this time, all the forages that were planted for white-tailed deer, and do you need to be excused? Or
yeah, I need to go back.
But were developed for cattle. Yeah. They were Auburn and Mississippi State. And
it was all about beef over here. I mean, it is.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's important to remember, too, New Zealand is an island, and so they don't have the land mass that we have here either. So they were having to engineer really highly productive plants, because they're called paddocks, aren't they?
Yep.
That y'all raise on. So where our cattle have these vast pastures that they just walk around and graze, these are super concentrated, the way I think about it. And they're having to concentrate, their not only their livestock on these paddocks, and on those paddocks are these very, very highly nutritious, highly palatable forages. So that's why it makes so much sense for deer farming.
Yeah, and to that point, Lanny, these guys have smaller acreage.
Yep.
And they're trying to be and they're trying to be as productive as possible. And that's where Wrightson came in. And they would take the characteristics from one plant and cross them with another. It's just very scientific, very interesting. Let's get started. Could you talk about why brassicas are so loved by the deer, and why that's a good thing because of what a brassica actually can provide for them?
So the big thing that why deer love brassicas is the energy content that's in them. They're really high quality. It's just like eating a bowl of candy. There's a lot of sugar in there. There's a lot of energy for the animal to grow and do its thing, and it just loves them. And the leafy state that the plant gets in, and produces lots of short leaves really quickly, graze them off, and then they'll regrow again. And that's what the deer love, is that short, healthy leaf. And that's what our plants do. I mean, we breed for plants that are highly productive. One of the big things that we do in our breeding program is select for high yield, but before we do that, we screen all the parents we use for palatability. So first of all, they've got to be eaten by the animal. If they don't get eaten by the animal, they're out of the breeding program, and then we start from there to select for all the other traits. So right from day one, we're working with highly palatable plants that the animals love, and they just grow well on them. Yeah.
And palatability is, it tastes good.
Yeah, that's
right.
Fancy way of saying they like the way it tastes.
Well,
so at one time, one of the guys, there's been a number of representatives of Wrightson that have been here, but at one time, I think I was told that there were over 700 varieties that were trialed and pushed to the side to select the 100 that would make it, that then would turn into 50, that then would turn in to work down to the right ones that are actually finding their way into this bag of seed that's coming all the way from New Zealand and landing here in the United States.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bobby. I mean, we screen hundreds of plants that never make it to the market. We would create, for every one that comes to the market, we probably create 50 lines that are discarded. And they just don't have the traits that the market wants, or that the animals like, or that we like, and we just simply discard them and start again. And so we've constantly got this breeding program that's going on year after year after year, looking to improve the the plants that we already have, and there is just simply hundreds that are discarded before we get the good one that comes to the market.
And that's what's been really impressive, because when we started, we were just super happy with these 6 or 8 cultivars that we had. But 3 years later, they're coming with new and improved. And it's every few years. And there's a Brassica breeding program down there. It was Andrew Dumbleton, if I'm not mistaken, and you guys. He's there in a lab coat pollinating plants with Q-tips. Yeah. It's really some fascinating stuff.
The problem is they tell us about it 5 or 10 years before they can give it to us. You know what I mean? So, we're working on we're finally going to be able to bring some stuff to market that we've been really talking about for 5 years. Yeah. So, super excited about that.
Yeah.
We want it now, though, Steve.
And it does take a long time. It's a slow process, but we get there in the end.
That's right.
So why is New Zealand considered the world's leader in forage research? Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, well, I think it's just, as you said before, we've got an intensive farming system. We've got a lot of animals that need to be fed in the summer or the winter, in particular the winter, and we just need the forage. Our pastures don't grow at that time of year. Our animals are all outdoors all year round, never housed in the winter or anything like that. So we have to feed them on highly productive forage plants in the winter months. And then in the summer, when we get dry conditions like you're experiencing here at the moment, we get this most summers. And then we've got to feed them in the summer when our pastures don't grow. So forage crops are just really important to our farming systems and our deer farm systems. And so we just I guess we've spent a lot of time trying to develop new cultivars that adapt to the climate and can be productive for the animals to eat.
So it's not just brassicas. You guys have some of the best chicory.
Yep.
Yeah.
And some, and we've had them for years, the red and white clovers.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're very impressive.
Yep. So our pasture system is really built around clovers and legumes, and really important for us to have red and white clover in our pasture system. So again, we're constantly selecting the white clovers exactly like we do the brassicas, under tough conditions, under grazing, checking that they're productive and persistent and all of those things. So yeah, really, really key to our farming systems is the legumes. Your free nitrogen, the way nitrogen costs are at the moment, legumes are really, really important.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're leading the way in having those grazing tolerant legumes.
So is there a way to in today's world, urea and some other sources of nitrogen are just through the roof? I don't know if they've ever been higher. Could be wrong about that, but I don't think they have. But is there a way to put a dollar value or how can you put a value on what your clover is performing, the service that it's performing for your soil in terms of producing nitrogen?
Well, look, we know from our trials in New Zealand that every white clover pasture, when we measure the performance of white clover, we can measure the dry matter it produces, and we can back calculate from there how much free nitrogen that's producing. And what we do is we work on about, and this is in metric terms, so I apologise for this, but we work on about 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year that a decent pasture sward will produce. So you work that back, it's what about, Mac?
400. It's about 400 pounds.
Look at there. Way to go,
like
Mike.
Yeah.
Got that calculator out.
Yeah.
Mississippi State would be proud there.
Go Dogs.
And so that's a lot of free nitrogen. 400 pounds per hectare divided by 2.5, so 175 pounds per acre or something like that.
Yeah, that's a huge deal.
It really is.
A lot of people are getting into this regenerative agriculture and all of that with the fertilizer prices skyrocketing. And, you can use this stuff to your advantage.
So are you guys, obviously you're in the ag market in a big way. Are y'all anticipating fertilizer coming back down anytime soon? What are you hearing?
Well, we're hearing that it probably isn't going to rush back down. It will correct and markets go up and down and it will definitely come down. But right now there's a whole raft of reasons for it not coming down in the near future. So legumes are really important. In any system, any cropping system, any pasture system, or any food plot system.
So let's stop right there. I want to make sure everybody learns as we go. And sometimes we take for granted things.
They know,
Can you tell us what a we call it a legume. You're calling it something a legume.
He's probably pronouncing it properly.
Yeah. So tell us what a legume is.
Well, it's a nitrogen-fixing plant. So the plant that takes fixes atmospheric nitrogen. And so any of the plants, so you've got beans, you've got peas, you've got lucerne or alfalfa as it's known here, you've got white clover, red clover, all of those sorts of things are legumes. Yeah.
Did y'all know kudzu is a legume?
I did know that.
Yeah.
And just because of this thing. That's it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how the most nitrogen on Earth is in the air.
Yeah.
And so they've figured out a way to get it out of the air.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Like when lightning strikes in a thunderstorm, that creates nitrogen that falls to the ground, but it pales to what a legume can do.
Learn something new every day.
How about that?
That's cool.
Yeah.
So in the same way you just explained what a legume is, could you explain what a brassica is?
Yeah, okay, Bobby. So the brassicas are, there's a few different types of brassicas, but the brassicas that we're familiar with and you guys use are usually either turnips or forage rape, or radish. Radish is a member of the brassica family as well. And so what you've got is basically a highly leafy plant, a plant that produces a lot of leaf really quickly. Some of them have bulbs, some of them have stems, and they're just a plant that's adapted to growing in either dry conditions or cool conditions and can store a lot of dry matter in its stem or in its leaf or in its bulb, and a lot of energy to feed animals with. Yeah.
Yeah. And one more, could you go one step further and explain the difference in forage and garden varieties?
Yeah, that's the important thing. So the forage varieties are bred for yield and selected for their productivity. The vegetable ones, what they tend to be is what we call short cycle brassicas. So they tend to be brassicas that will be planted, will produce leaf that you can harvest, or a head that you can harvest, or maybe even a seed pod, and in the case of oilseed rape and things like that. So those vegetable and oilseed types tend to be what we call short cycle, and they'll bolt to seed really quickly, and they have no forage value because they just don't produce enough leaf. So you've really got to be careful that you select for the right ones, which are the forage ones.
And all of ours are forage.
Absolutely.
brassicas.
We don't even think about a garden variety.
Just again, because it's for deer. So if you go to the co-op and you say, hey, I just want some brassicas, you're not going to get the same thing that you're getting.
Probably going to be dwarf Essex rape.
Yeah.
Which is a garden variety.
Yeah. And that's how people have kind of knocked us off through the years. There's been 25 years worth of guys helping us from Wrightson, and we have said this is our biggest problem: is that guys go to a little local farm store and go, "I just want some of those
brassicas,"
and they just give them a brown bag of garden variety, and then the guy has failure. The deer don't like it as much, and they assume that's biologic, but it's not. It could not be further from the truth.
Exactly, and there are a lot of different types in the vegetables space. So you just really got to be careful and absolutely know what you're buying. But so the only way really is to buy those true forage types.
Right, and I will say that some of these co-op varieties, deer will eat.
Oh, sure.
But they have not been extensively selected for this particular application.
To me, the forage variety means that it gets eaten and then it creates more leaves. Where a garden variety is more tasty, I guess is the best way to put it. So he's selecting for palatability and forage production because we know how much forage it takes to grow a quality whitetail,
and nutritional value.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the third thing that makes the biologic brassicas so different is the nutritional value.
Digestible nutrients that are available.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff will say VNS on the bag for variety not stated, and it's just they grow that particular brassica, harvest the seed, clean it, do whatever they need to do, put it in a bag, and it's at the co-op. So you don't always know exactly what it is.
All brassicas are not the same.
No, they're not. And so through the years, I've got a plant tissue test that we ran back in the day that we can put out on the web if people need to see it. But so the protein, the crude protein values were, I showed it to you just a little while, 38%. Yeah. Digestible TDN was at, I think, 84%.
Yeah,
so
80, 90.
it's just they're just phenomenal plants.
Yeah, absolutely, Bobby. I mean, you cut them in the right state or graze them at the right state when they're short and leafy, and they are phenomenal. I mean, like any plant, once it's gone up to seed, it's not palatable and the energy levels drop. But if you can keep it in a leafy state, then that's exactly what you want. And that's where you get that really high quality. And I mean, as I said before, we're selecting for these plants that remain leafy for long periods of time under stress, and that's when you get that high quality and you can grow animals quickly on that stuff.
So we've been talking about deer and brassicas and how much they like them and how it's good for deer. We were just talking about legumes and how they're good for the soil because they fix nitrogen from the air. Can you tell us a little bit about how brassicas are good at scavenging nitrogen from down below?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they pick up a lot of nutrients from the soil, and nitrogen's one of them, and they utilize that in their growth. So they have the ability to push their root system down and then just draw up any of those elements that are available. And there's some really key nutrients that they need for their growth. Nitrogen is one of them. The other one's phosphate. They need lots of phosphate at establishment to get good plant population, and so there's some key things that you need to do to get them right. But they really love lots of phosphate, lots of nitrogen in that early phase of their growth as well. Yeah.
And, I think that's one of the reasons farmers use them a lot in cover crops is because they have such an aggressive taproot. So, for example, the farmer plants corn and feeds it a lot of nitrogen. Well, corn roots are pretty shallow, and nitrogen moves quickly through the soil, deeper down into the column, and gets past some of those corn roots. And then the brassicas, when you follow up with some radish, rape, whatever, it has such a deep taproot, it's able to get or scavenge that nitrogen that got below that previous crop. And either a deer can eat it, or when the brassica dies the following spring, it releases that nitrogen onto the soil surface for the next crop.
A little higher up.
So your legumes fix the nitrogen, and your brassicas scavenge the nitrogen. So they kind of work in harmony together.
Combination. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
And they do it at a time of year when the soils are prone to leaching a lot of nitrogen as well. So that autumn growth, that fall growth and that early winter growth, that's when they pick it up, and that's when you're at the most prone state for your nitrogen to leach out the bottom. And so that's exactly why they use them in those cover crop systems after corn, Dudley, yeah.
So, Stephen, you might want to get you a sip of water because I'm fixing to turn Mac loose on you, and he's going to
rapid fire.
But so while you're getting that sip of water, I'm going to ask you: can you think? I mean, you've been coming up here a long time. You've seen some of our plots and conditions that guys are trying to go grow plots. But can you think of some tips that you could give our listeners that this would help you grow a better food plot that involves the brassicas?
Yeah, I reckon there's probably 3 key tips.
What now?
I reckon. I think. Reckon.
We use that.
We use it all the time.
Go ahead, mate.
I wrecked them.
Damn near killed them.
So there's 3 key things that I think are really important. The first one's do a soil test. Okay, so you really got to know what you're dealing with in terms of your soil. And I won't go into all the details about doing that. I mean, there's plenty of people that in this room and online that can tell you what to do there. But then correct the issues if there are any on that soil test. And as I mentioned before, phosphate's really important. Decide how you're going to plant it. And the planting method, whether you're going to go no-till, whether you're going to cultivate the soil, whichever way you're going to do it. But decide, do it early, so plan. We often say proper planning prevents poor performance. And so that's a really, really key thing. So plan what you're going to do your soil test. And then if you're cultivating, the other key thing to do is make sure that you consolidate the soil. Because what we see a lot of is that people just throw the seed on top of a worked paddock or a cultivated area, and there's no consolidation. That seed, some of it will sit on top, some of it will go down deep, and then you get really uneven establishment, and you might even get gaps or areas in the paddock where it doesn't establish. So consolidate the soil after it's being worked. Make sure that you the key part about that is when you consolidate it is you bring moisture back up to the surface, and it's right there for the seed to to utilize when it germinates. And the final thing is, don't drill the seed too deep. So you really only want to go about half an inch deep for the brassicas. It's really important don't go too deep, because if you go too deep, the plant uses all of its vigor up trying to come through the soil surface, and then it's just got no energy to grow. So near the surface, consolidation so that you can control that sowing depth that also brings the moisture back up, and then bingo, you've got a good establishment.
So, clarification.
Yeah.
Consolidation is
Cultipacking.
right.
Yep.
If you don't have a cultipacker, you can drive back and forth and use your 4-wheeler tires, things like that. It's way better than dragging. So, the way I explain it to people is, if you pick up some soil, just say you dissed or cultivated your soil, it feels fluffy and dry, but when you squeeze it in your hand and make a ball of it, it almost feels cold with moisture. And so by cultipacking it, i.e. consolidating, you're putting that seed by more moisture.
So, Stephen, you saw the cultipacker we have in the front room when you walk in. That's one anybody can afford. It's a Packer Max, the Gamekeeper edition.
Mm-hmm.
Few $100s.
It's an absolutely great machine. I mean, we use a more industrial scale one of those at home. You know, we've got big, what we call flat rollers. They're massive. They probably stand about 4 or 5 feet high, and that's all about consolidating, pushing the stones back down under the soil. We fill those up with water. So your little machine there is absolutely perfect. And the thing I like about that is it's got the V's on it, the ridges. And what that does also is it helps break up any of the clods that might be on the surface. And then it actually just, really packs it down perfectly. So that's a great machine.
And so the guys at Ferminator. Lanny, you've been using a Ferminator.
I have been on a Ferminator for the last 2-3 days. So let me tell you what, it's a great product, no doubt about it. And Cultipac's right behind you, puts those little ridges in there. So
you don't realize how good that is until you use one.
No, you don't. Until you have your field prepared, then you drive over it with the Ferminator. Then you go back and look where you went over, and you're like, oh man.
It just looks pretty,
I
too.
want my whole field to look like that. That's right.
It makes it look like you know what you're doing.
It does.
It looks pro.
That's right.
Okay, guys. So look, hey, Austin, get ready because you're going to follow Mac with a question. But Stephen, get ready because we'll stop him at some point. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna throw Bobby for a loop on this one. I have a lot of scientific questions, but I'm gonna ask a pretty basic one to start off with. What is your favorite brassica for forage for whitetail?
Well, I think there's probably 2 that spring to mind. I mean, well, actually, no. I've probably got 4 or 5. But where do I start? Chicory's a fantastic plant for whitetail.
It seems like people don't really.
Over here they don't
chicory
give a chance. It does real well in the summer, doesn't it?
Does well
late
in the summer.
summers when I see it be utilized.
Got a big deep tap root that goes down really, really far down, and picks up a lot of water. Grows well, really leafy, really highly digestible, and got lots of high energy in it. So that's one plant I do like. I mean, you can't go past white clover for any animal, particularly whitetail. They love white clover. And then if you said to me about the brassicas, there's probably 2 that spring to mind. There's the endurance radish, which is the new radish, and you've seen the.
We got them in the ground right now.
That's a wonderful plant. There's a really interesting story with that one. It's a really leafy plant. It's got a beautiful big bulb on it. Doesn't run up to seed. It's got a nice soft leaf for radish. So that's a really interesting one. And then the old favourite, the Biro, that's been around forever.
That's my favourite one.
Yeah, Toxie's always, he's like, can I just get that by itself?
Yeah. That's the one I pick, to eat.
Look,
myself.
It's delicious.
It is delicious.
Yeah,
it really
absolutely.
Is.
Yeah.
I eat the fire out of it.
And the thing about Biro is it's reliable. It does what it does year in, year out. It's leafy. It's got great quality, and it just keeps growing after it's been grazed off. It's quick out of the ground. The animals get onto it early because there's no maturity period like there is with some of those old rapes, like you mentioned before, Dudley, the dwarf Essex. Really, they're unpalatable to the animal till they're about 90 or 120 days. Well, that's not the case with Biro. It's palatable right at day 1, and so we see animals grazing it after about 6 weeks. So sorry, Mac, I couldn't give you one, but
no,
4 or 5.
We didn't expect
you hit
there to
one
be
that
one.
I wanted. So back to the endurance radish. So
And
that's
this
a
is a
brand
new radish.
It's a brand new radish.
Yeah, we should have it on the market. A limited availability next year, I believe.
That's what we're hoping for.
We're hoping,
Stephen, you may have cracked the door open. We may get a lot of requests for this thing, but it's coming down the pipe, guys.
And it's interesting that the Biomass you were mentioning is it's a classic. It's been around, at least for us, since
the whole time.
Since day
one.
one.
It sure has.
Yep.
Interesting.
But the endurance radish, to me, is what's so interesting is the trials and the time that's been put making this radish. I mean, it predates war too, right?
Wow.
Well, there's a bit of history there, and I mean, if you go right the way back to to when these plants were first started breeding them, it is way back in the 1940s. Some interesting stories about. This plant comes, if I can go into
Yeah,
it.
Sure, we
Please
love it.
do.
So this plant is a cross between a New Zealand radish and a South African radish. And if we trace our lineage right back, the South African radish came out of Japan in straight after World War II. Some South African farmers brought these seeds back from Japan, and they decided that this plant would have a place in South Africa for feeding their cattle. And they started growing seed of it and multiplying it up and planting it. And then the South African government started looking at how they had a breeding program, and they started looking at how they could improve the productivity of this radish. So they started a breeding program on these fodder radishes in South Africa that had a lineage back to Japan. And then in the late 80s, our plant breeder, he was working on breeding radishes as well, and he was breeding leafy ones that had lots of regrowth and were soft in the leaf. And he got talking to the guy in South Africa. They swapped some germplasm, and all of a sudden we had 10 years later or 15 years later, we had a new radish cultivar that was selected from parents of New Zealand and South African lineage. So, yeah.
So the most of the radishes that are or sold as ours too are daikon radishes. Ours is a more fresh or the highest quality one we can find. So if you're currently buying radishes here, you're probably buying a daikon radish.
That is correct. And it's a great radish.
It's a great radish, but it's a tillage radish, right? So what Dudley was talking about, he goes way down. That's why they plant them as crops. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dudley. I'm just regurgitating, what you say. And where this plant, like we were talking about, is a forage variety. So not only does it have that deep taproot, but it also has been selected because it produces so much more forage than the daikon.
It's got a different shaped tuber as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Did you say tuber?
Tuber.
Yeah.
Good day, Mike.
We call it tuber. It's actually a bulb, but it's just ingrained in our mind.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they're slightly
It's a
different
bulb.
shapes, and there's a few other traits that are different. But you think about the daikons, everybody's seen a daikon radish.
Mm-hmm.
They have that long cylindrical bulb, and they produce some leaf. And then in the wrong conditions, they can bolt up to seed quite quickly, and that's what makes them cheap, because they're really easy to produce seed off. And there's no hiding that. They're cheap, they're really easy to get hold of, and that's simply because they're bred to go to seed and produce lots of seed. And so this one, the Endurance, is bred exactly the opposite. It's really late flowering. That's one of the key traits the breeders were looking for. They didn't want something that went to seed because they wanted to extend the grazing period, the window of harvest, and get this leafiness. And a lot of radishes also have prickly leaves. They have little wee, what they call trichomes, little wee hairs on the leaves, which can be unpalatable to animals. And you've probably touched them and felt the leaves, and so when an animal's eating that, it's in its mouth, and that's not so good. So our breeder, Alan, he selected for this leafy, soft, waxy leaf that just did not have those trichomes on it. And that was a really interesting trait because that automatically improves palatability. And then you've got the bulb shape, slightly bigger bulb. It's what I consider sort of more of a football bulb above the ground. It's quite round, and it can be really big. It's still got that penetrating root and does all of that soil conditioning stuff and picks up all the nitrogen like a daikon radish does, but it's got a different bulb shape that's more productive. And it's just a really nice leafy plant. And the other thing that actually what we're noticing now that we're using it more and more in farms is we're seeing that it's starting to, that it does have a sort of a crowning effect where it'll shoot more leaves come off the crown of the bulb. And the daikons don't tend to do that. They tend to have a few leaves that go straight up and then a stem that comes up. Whereas this stuff will actually start to shoot from a crown and puts more leaves out rather than going up. It tends to go out more. And that's a really interesting trait because that actually gives you some regrazability.
Well, I tell you what, we're super excited about it. And I think that I just can't wait to get it out and available to everybody.
So let me ask you this, and you tell me if this surprises you, what you know about radishes. But I'm going to mention a couple of our blends, and what's in the blends, and anybody can see on the back. In fact,
Yeah,
we encourage people to look on our
read
labels.
That seed tag. That's the
and
difference
see
in
that.
Biologic and everything else.
It
right.
is. So like what we typically experience with the deer radishes is we see early and mid-season heavy grazing pressure on those, and they don't even last until the end of the season. They're usually grazed down, but that's when they go after the bulbs, not the tubers.
Well,
but then we've got a product called Maximum, and we've selected, with your help, we've got cultivars that are attractive early, mid, and late. So we see that blend last throughout the hunting season. Then we've got winter bulbs, and we see they're not palatable till later in the year. And so guys that are interested in trying to have food in late December and January and February, which is a good thing to do, that's when we see those being utilized. But knowing the cultivars that we have selected, does any of that surprise you the way that's playing out?
No, I think that's exactly right, Bobby. I think the important thing on any food plot is actually having that range of forage that's available, because you don't know when the deer are going to come in. I mean, they come in at different stages, different times, so having something on offer all the time is actually really important. And then when you get to that late period and that late fall, early winter period, it's really, really critical to have something there, and that's where those winter bulbs work perfectly. And that's actually what excites me about the endurance radish as well, because it will go late into that season. It's got the ability to hold without bolting up to seed and still producing leaf. So there'll be a bulb there'll be the leaf production. So I think we've probably got something in that could be grazed early and actually could have that sort of mid to late season grazing as well. Not as late as the winter bulbs, for sure. You know, the old turnips that are in that are good, solid turnip for later in the season. So I think we've got something that's got a wide fit, but not quite as late as the winter bulbs.
So let me do this. I want to get Austin on next, but while we're listening to Austin ask, Mac, would you do a fact check for me? Would you look up the per acre tonnage of ryegrass and just have that number for me when we come back? So, I mean, I don't know, so we'll all learn this at the same time. So, Austin, have you got a comment or a question for Stephen?
Yeah, so Stephen, something we've been dealing with a lot, especially with the drought the past few months, and being a really tough fall growing conditions really everywhere that food plots have been planted. In regards to pelletized type fertilizers versus foliar or liquid applied fertilizers, if you had a ideal stage of growth, and let's just take brassicas for example, with so many people having to either replant or just having to plant late in the season compared to when we would normally plant. And we're already looking at, limited amount of growth because, we've got days that are getting shorter. People's soil temperatures are going to start going downward. And, the trend for growing things is going down instead of up. If you had an ideal stage of growth to apply a foliar fertilizer or a liquid fertilizer for a brassica crop like Maximum, what stage of growth would you say that would be in relationship to the day it germinated?
Ooh, yeah, that's
Austin never comes with what do deer like? You know what I mean?
Well, no, that is a tough one to answer. But typically, what we would say in normal growing conditions, that you would apply your foliar fertilizer just before canopy closure. So by that, you're probably looking at sort of what am I saying here, Lenny? About 8 inches, 8 inches high, just as those big paddle leaves start to close over and touch each other. That's when it's perfect. Now, when it's dry, obviously you may not even have that stage yet. But I think the key thing then is to still get the foliar fertilizer on, as when the moisture comes, the plant will utilize it. And probably the foliar fertilizer is the better one in this stage, because the risk is that if you will put pelletized fertilizer down and broadcast it on, that it may not get broken down in time for the plant to pick it up. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really important thing to look at in these dry conditions, is certainly foliar fertilizer, yeah, for sure.
It's interesting when you talk about foliar fertilizers and what we've got in this, we've kind of learned something, Stephen. I don't even know if you know about this, but we've got a product called Mean Green that you can mix with water, and it turns these plants almost blue. They're so green. It's incredible.
It's good stuff. And then we've got a liquid clover fertilizer and our liquid food plot fertilizers too.
That's right. So we've got a couple of different ways that you can do it, but I've become a big fan of the Foliar applied fertilizers. And Dudley, you're shaking your head. I know you have.
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
it's got it's hard to get micros and bagged fertilizer these days, so that's immediately available to the plant. When the ground is cold and wet, it's more difficult for them to uptake nutrients from the ground. So the foliars help with that as well.
So when you ride over a clover plot and you're spraying it, you're not really hurting those plants, are you? They bounce right back.
Straight back. Yeah. What I just tell people is don't look behind, because you'll see wheel marks. A couple of days later, they're gone. If you don't look around, you never see them again.
So is there a time of the day or a time of or conditions that are better, or conditions you wouldn't ride across a plot like that?
Well, I mean, if it was really, really wet, sodden wet, that you wouldn't go over, because you tend probably then just to push the
Lanny
leaves.
would. We've had to pull Lanny out a number of times.
Jess would. No, I don't ride in the fields, period.
Yeah.
And they're right, Mac.
You're exactly right.
The problem with that is you tend to push the leaves down. They pick up some soil. They can get some disease and things on them. So you wouldn't do it when it was that wet that you were struggling to get across the plot. The other thing is you wouldn't do it in the peak of the heat of the day, because it's just stupid to be out there doing it at that time of day. There's better things to be doing.
Right.
Yeah, so you would do it in the morning or in the evening as the time to do it. Yeah.
And what is it? A stomata? Is that right?
Stomata.
Boom. Huh?
But I want to say, it doesn't only enter the stomata. There's little cracks and crevices all over the leaf that they can enter.
Okay, so where I wanted to go a minute ago when I was asking Mac to look that up, we know from our experience and what we have done in years past. This was prior to Mac. Mac, you probably were
maybe
in about the 8th grade over at Heritage Academy. You were probably just learning what girls were, be my guess. But we were growing this incredible food plots, and we would take and measure out 10 square feet, take a weed eater, and weed it, and then we were weighing that biomass. But correct me if I'm wrong, but we felt like we were growing between 8 and 10 tons of forage per acre. That is an incredible number, guys, because Mac, I don't know. I'm looking at you, ryegrass, the cheapest thing somebody can plant. How much does it grow per acre?
So this is from our good friends over at the Mississippi State Extension Agency. But as far as a dry hay option, it's about 2,000 pounds of dry matter of forage per acre.
Okay, so we're
talking about 4 to 5 times that.
At least.
Exactly.
And guys, if you've got my point is, you've only got a few, you've got a finite amount of food plots.
That's right.
In my case, I've got a 2.5, 3 acre food. That's all I got.
Yeah.
So I want to grow as much tonnage of forage,
as
groceries as I can. And so that's where the blends that have brassicas in them, that also have clovers in them and cereal, those, all of a sudden we're just talking about a lot of forage. Once you understand that, Lanny.
Yeah, that's right. It makes
perfect sense.
A lot more sense.
We get it. Just I'm looking at you, Steve. Around here, there's a lot of guys that just go to the co-op and buy a bag of ryegrass.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's no nutritional or very little nutritional value.
And that's one thing that I was going to add to that. So at 2,000 pounds of dry forage matter, there's only 50 to 60% of that is digestible nutrients.
Yeah.
So really, you're
and
looking
on
at
some Nebraskas, you're at 80 and 90%, right, on digestibility.
Yeah, I mean, 84. We've got a test that come back, and I think you had confirmed that they're highly digestible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's why we use them at home. So the thing is that what you do with brassicas is you grow at a time of year when your ryegrass won't be growing. You're growing through tough, dry conditions and storing feed in a big plant that can stand up there and hold it. Whereas ryegrass, what it does is it reaches a ceiling yield really quickly. So it'll get to about, in our terms, we say 3,500 kilograms of dry matter, so 3,500 pounds of dry matter standing, not even knee high, and that's where it reaches its ceiling yield. What happens after that is the older leaves die, and then the plant produces a new leaf, the old one dies, and so it's not actually growing more, it's just replacing those leaves. So ryegrass reaches ceiling yield. You've got to chop it off, you've got to then get it back into a growing state. But what happens is that you come into a dry period and ryegrass shuts down, whereas your brassicas will still keep on building forage, building biomass, and keep growing into those into those drier conditions, when it gets really dry like it is now, they'll sit and they'll hold that mass. They won't lose it like a ryegrass plant would. And then when you get that rain in the fall, you'll get that bounce back and you'll get more growth, and the plant can put on that more biomass, and it'll be able to hold it. So that's the really important thing to know. There's some massive differences, not just in forage quality between ryegrass and brassicas as well, but there's the ability to grow and to hold that biomass that it's growing and make that available for the animals.
Mac, what you got?
One thing that's interesting to me, talking to Stephen, is how you actually put animals on these fields that you're testing to see how they adapt and how they actually forage on these food sources. And that to me is super interesting, how we were talking about your shield grains and your clovers, and how the rye can be more of a filler, but really without the clovers, it really wouldn't do much at all.
Yep, that's exactly right. I mean, to get the best out of a ryegrass-based pasture, you've got to have clover. You've got to have legume in there, because that's where the quality is. That's what's driving the animal performance. And so it's no point just buying cheap ryegrass. You've got to make sure you've got that balance there with the white clover.
And if you're going to take the time, you got the land, you got to work the land, you got all these costs. If you're going to take the time to put some seed out, put some good seed out. I mean,
it's the cheapest
part of the equation.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen, we preach that.
Yeah.
The most least expensive part of the equation. We don't have cheap seed.
That's right.
Okay.
If you go buy it, it's expensive, but in that whole equation, it's
the least expensive thing.
That's right.
The way I look at it is, if I could spend $60 and get 8 tons of food, I'd probably spend that $60.
Oh, that's right. And you were tight.
Yeah,
he's tighter than I am, I believe.
No way.
I think he is.
I got a banker as a dad. So
I think he's tighter than I am.
Austin, have you got another question that we can? Laney, I didn't know you had a question.
I mean, how come I can't ask questions? I mean, every podcast you point me for questions, I don't even get to say anything around here.
Austin, hang on.
Away.
Okay, this might be a little bit off subject. I understand how turkeys breed and how deer breed. And I've heard you talk about breeding plants for a long time. Help me understand that process. And I've also, on that, what is germplasm?
Germplasm is just a fancy word for appearance.
Okay.
So it's a really good question to ask. And Mac touched on it a wee bit there, because we select our parents first. Right. So what we do is we pick plants we like the look of, and we think, hey, that one's interesting, we'll cross it with that one. But one of the things we do before we get to that stage is we screen all the potential parents that we have to see if they're palatable. We put animals across them. If they are not palatable, they don't get eaten by the animals.
They don't even get to go in the breeding program.
They don't get to breed.
Yeah.
And then so we start with parent plants. We start with germplasm that actually is palatable to animals, and then we will cross that. And so we will plant the plants out. We will look at them individually, individual plants. We'll have thousands of plants planted out. We'll take the ones that we like the look of and we think that they're a good match with this one over here, and then we will cross them. And so they will be planted in a pollen-proof tent, and then they will cross.
Pollinate each other. Okay.
Or we use bees to get in there and pollinate them as well. Sometimes we do it by hand. We do it in glass houses as well, and there's times when we have to actually go through and trigger the plants ourselves as well. And so we then harvest that seed, and then that's when we start our program of testing to see if the genetics are there, if we've got what we want, if we've got the traits that we want. If we haven't, we'll then start doing other things to back cross.
So it's pretty much like everything else. You get what you want, leave them in a room together, and then,
and then something happens.
Eventually something happens.
And it's crazy. It starts with a yard by yard area. It's a very small area and then it just slowly grows and grows and grows until you can sell it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we can start with a few ounces of seed, and in 5 years we'll have a few.
That's why it takes so long
pounds.
for us to get this stuff.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's just that whole multiplication rate.
Right.
Yeah, good thing they make multiple seeds per plant.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and Laney, there's things you may not remember this, but through the years we've had some things that we got real successful with. We knew we were going to be successful when we would bring them to other hemispheres.
Oh.
So we doubled we shortened the plant breeding time
by moving them.
So you were growing them in the southern hemisphere, growing them in the northern hemisphere, and you had to really have people you trusted.
Just like the endless summer.
Absolutely. Yep, we can do that because they're a long these brassicas are a long cycle thing. They're about a 12-month crop or an 11-month crop, and so what we can do is we can plant northern and southern hemisphere. So autumn, fall in New Zealand, so March in New Zealand, and then up here in the fall as well. And then we can get a January harvest at home and a July harvest up here, and so you can double up.
Cool.
Yeah, when you got something hot and you know it's going to be good, that's what they do. Mac, you need to leave the room. What do you got?
No, I had one more thing I want to say. So what's so interesting is you think New Zealand is on the complete opposite side of the globe, but Stephen gets this seed to our bags in 6 weeks from harvest.
Fresh.
Yeah, so we 6 weeks of the transit time for shipping. I mean, we've got to harvest it, we've got to process it, and then we put it in a container, and it's up here in 6 weeks' time. It's actually that's from when it leaves our store to when it arrives in Oregon, and the actual transit time from New Zealand to the US is only 3 weeks, but it takes about 3 weeks for us to get it from our store to the port, the deep sea port that it goes out of. So,
cool.
It's pretty fascinating how that works.
Yeah, the whole plant breeding thing is just amazing to me. Sorry.
And then we pray that a pirate ship doesn't get the container with those seeds on it.
Hey, they better not. We'll have to take matters in our own hands.
Yeah, I'm coming in a John boat.
Well, we'll send Austin after him.
Stephen, let's circle back to clovers just a little bit. The longer we're in business, the more that we do. I mean, these animals, these deer, we consider them our customers, and we're trying to please them. But it just seems like, clovers really fit a bill, and they're so important to what a gamekeeper managing a property. And so I asked you about growing brassicas. Is there some tricks or techniques or things you've learned that a guy can apply to clover and help him have a better clover stand?
Well, it's pretty much the same principles, Bobby. It's all about planting. It's preparation of the soil. It's making sure you've done the soil test. When I mentioned with brassicas before, I said phosphate was the key element for getting them established. You've got to have that phosphate right. For legumes, for clovers, it's actually soil pH has got to be corrected. So that's the key one for your when you're doing a soil test with your legumes. You're wanting to plant a legume, get that soil test done, check the soil pH, make sure it's in the right zone for your legumes. They like it high. They like, in our terms, we'd be saying 6, 8, 7, 2, and that's when they grow really well. So get that spot on, and that's the critical thing there. And again, make sure that the soil's well consolidated. Brassicas will establish on the surface not too badly, from an oversowing situation or a direct drilling situation. But clover, really, the best way to establish it is into a cultivated situation. I mean, it does really well in cultivated situations, and it's got to be right near the surface. So definitely only half an inch deep or less.
How do you feel about coated seeds?
Yeah, well, coated seeds are important for some things, and legumes actually, it is quite important for legumes, because what you can do is you can bring in some things such as inoculants into that, and what the inoculant does is it stimulates the nodules on the clover roots to start the nitrogen fixation cycle. So with clovers, it's really important that you can get that inoculation process going, and that's one way of bringing it in is through coated seed. So
yeah, we've become a fan of coating seeds.
It's great for the wildlife.
It kind of confuses a lot of people, but the more you kind of study and learn about it, it's a fascinating help to get that seed established.
For a wildlife manager especially, because we often don't have the best soil conditions, or we don't have the best seed beds, or we're planting in these remote places. So coated seed is I think a great tool for the wildlife manager.
Yeah, I love that final forage product of ours. It's a coated Brassica product. I mean, if you think about it, we were starting out recommending 10 pounds an acre. Now we're thinking more 8, and that coating takes up space in the bag. But when you consider that you really only need one seed, roughly every 8 inches to a foot, having that nitrogen coating on the outside of the seed, so the day that seed sprouts, it has a healthy environment right around it, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, we're looking forward to doing more coated seeds in the future.
Yeah, I think that the future is going to be.
Too,
there's going to be. So what, guys? If you're listening, so the farmers out there, the precision farmers, if you buy a bag of corn, it's stacked with different coatings and bacteria that help this and prevent that, and so that technology is kind of making its way over into what we're doing. Our clovers have been coated since when we first started bringing them over.
Where I really started noticing the difference is when I was doing that, poor man's no-till style or the throw and mow. That's not the greatest conditions in the world, but the seed is having to sprout on the surface, and having that coating and that nutrient pack makes a big difference.
So you've been using final forage?
Well,
for that, mostly?
Yes. If not, I'm using the seed coat on it.
Gotcha.
So one of the things,
the Delta Ag seed coat.
Gotcha.
That's right. That's a really good one, Johnny McRice Delta Ag seed coat. So one of the things that since we started this, I've been really proud of is the fact that our blends. When we think of Maximum Winter Bulbs, Final Forage, the Radish, all those are super high in protein. And guys, when we started this, would come up to me and go, I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy in the room, but so they would come up and try to say, well, you know what, my deer's they've already grown their antlers. Why do I need to plant something so super high protein in September when they've already grown their antlers? And why can't I just plant a bag of ryegrass? And I would, explain to them or try my best that, hey, deer love high protein food sources. And even though they totally agree with you, and they've already grown their antlers, we'd like to carry them through that fall and winter in the best shape that they can be. So when they go through the rut, they're not, they lose a lot of weight in the rut, 20%, 25%. So we're helping carry them through the rut or helping them rebound from the rut, that all that good quality nutrition is there. So they immediately, when Lanny, one of your favorite words, antler genesis, when they drop those antlers and started, we want them to be in the best shape that they can be in, so that they don't have to replenish that whole skeletal system before they can send the excess to their antlers. I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but
sure.
that's kind of the whole the what Biologic has been about.
Sure, and these brassicas, even though they're high in protein, they're very palatable. They have sugars in them, what's they call bricks and all that other kind of stuff. So, and we all know that, what is it? Austin said it 1,000 times. If you can give a whitetail herd a consistent diet of 16% protein or more, they're going to, express their full potential. So.
Well, and I think you said the magic word in my mind. I'm looking around the room at everybody, and Max paying attention to this. Dudley, you're texting. So, herd. It's not just about the bucks.
No, it's about the herd.
It's about that whole herd.
The more we're learning about, genetics, that even that doe, if she's got that 16% protein level and she's not stressed, her fawn will exhibit his full genetic potential earlier in life. So that, I think that, I don't know, I'm just making an assumption here, but that's why deer in the Midwest, they have this abundance of forage. So at 1 and 2 years old, they don't look like our 1 and 2 year old deer. You know what I mean? Because there he is right there. Look at Hercules. He is about a year and a half.
I like to eat good year round. I don't know about y'all.
And then you think of the clovers too. The legumes during that antler genesis time, and when that clover comes out of sleeping through the dormant period, it starts shooting up, and it's a readily available food source in those spring and summer months.
And we've mentioned this earlier, but the drive home point for me with these brassicas is, we plant the blends, we plant the clover. Those are great at the right time of year, but usually in January and February, those are lip high. I say it, it's like a putting green out there. Well, some of those brassicas that I don't like saying this, least prefer, but that are there at the end of the season, that's where their food is. Outside of, you manage your habitat in the woods too, but that's the remaining plant out there for them to eat on by design.
So, Stephen, sometimes through these 20 years, we'll have a guy and he'll call from South Mississippi where they don't get a lot of frost, and we don't know the exact rationale here, the scientific explanation for it, or it's South Alabama and they don't get a lot of frost. South Georgia, there's kind of through that southern part of the states where we're in right here. And they'll say, well, you know what, I planted that maximum. My deer didn't eat it till about late January or February. And it makes us scratch our heads because we can't they eat it as soon as it comes out of the ground here. What could be happening in that scenario? I'll tell you what we think.
Tell me what you think.
A lot of times, if a deer's never seen it before, first time it's planted, they may not know what it is. And so they're a little slow to figure it out. Or there could be a heck of a mass crop going on, and that pulls them off of the food plot for a little while, and then it kind of gets away from them, and it gets a little bigger, and maybe it's not as tender. So those are two scenarios that come to mind. But tell me what, from a science perspective, what's going on there?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's that they've never seen it before, and I can remember as a kid watching sheep graze turnips, and you put them into a paddock, and the first 3 or 4 days they spend the whole time walking around the fence line. And lambs in particular, you put them into leafy turnip and they just don't know what it is. And so they'll walk around the fence line, eat all the grass, and then eventually they'll go on to the leafy turnip and they'll start eating it. And I think probably that's got a lot to do with it. There may not be a lot of food plots around that area. They may not have seen food plots before, so they just simply don't want to do it.
Or a broadleaf plant.
And learning curve. Yeah.
And so, exactly. It's a learning curve. They're not quite sure what it is. There could be that there's other forage about, and it could be simply that the conditions aren't quite cool enough as well, and the sugars might not be quite elevated enough in the plant, and there might be another forage source where they've got some energy levels, plants that have got better energy levels at that time, and it's not until the growing season cools down a little bit that those elevations occur in the sugars, and that might be the other thing that's driving it, and bingo, they get onto it.
So, Dudley, you and I have talked about this numerous times. We've tried to understand the movement of the sugars, this mysterious thing, because there's some people that say that doesn't happen, that it doesn't change at all, and we don't really know. I mean, we anecdotally know what we see, but
people always say frost, and it's not, once the first frost hits, they're all of a sudden really sweet. I mean, I've eaten greens myself, and they're not, I don't notice really a different sweetness, but I want to say Bronson and them have done a study on this, but it's more of a slow transgression. It starts getting cooler. There's chemical changes in the plants that's going on, that kind of thing. I want to say it's not really just immediately after a frost. And I want to say Bronson or some of that crowd has done a study on this. But it's more of a transgression. It starts getting cooler. The days start getting shorter. Soil temperatures are changing. And it's just a chemical change. Plants, they move their energy down into the roots, things like that. But I do believe it makes it slightly more palatable as the season progresses.
Yeah, and there'll be a change in the dry matter content at that stage too, as the plants are, when they're really young and tender and conditions are moist and they're growing really rapidly. There's very little dry matter in the plant, and so they're soft and everything. And as you get later into the season, the dry matter content goes up a wee bit as well. And so there's a change within the plant, and there's a number of things for it. But yeah.
We've tried to really understand that, and I'm going to say we're not smart enough to figure that out. We know what we see out in the woods, and we know what people tell us, and then sometimes we may pick up on that and take that as, well, this is what's happening, but we really don't know until somebody like you or Bronson or I think Dr. Craig Harper, I think he spent some time with
maybe it was Craig
trying to understand it. We don't want to mislead anybody, but it does seem like after they've been frosted on a time or two, all of a sudden it's like something happens and the deer just go crazy for them.
Well, even, growing up, the turnip patch, you waited on it to get a frost, but they said they turned sweeter. I don't know if that's maybe that's folklore too, but.
Well, I got that refractometer
that's right.
a few years ago, and we were going out to the cotton mill and squishing the juice out of the stem and the leaves, and there was a very slight difference from early on to later. By human standards, it may not be very noticeable, but Toxie always says a deer's brain and stomach are connected better than ours, and it's just those slight differences, I think, that really draw them in the later in the season. Again, the plants in the woods are becoming less
palatable.
Don't
have as much to eat either.
That's so it's
a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
Well, and probably the other thing, and I don't know, I'm not an animal scientist, but you probably find that as it cools down, the animal's energy levels requirement goes up as well, and so they'll be driven to actually take in more forage as well. So there'll be a combination of it won't be one thing; it'll be 4 or 5 different things.
Yeah, and like at my farm, when I first planted brassicas, they really didn't start utilizing them until the 3rd year, and you had mentioned that earlier. We've had customers call and say they planted it and the deer never touch it. It seems to be a bit of a learning curve, especially in the South, but it is so worth it. You might need to have a sacrificial year or 2. Maybe plant smaller patches and let them find it instead of planting a big field of it. But pretty much everybody's using them now, and that's not as much of an issue.
Well, anecdotally, it just seems like it's more South Georgia, South Alabama, South. In my mind, it has those. Sometimes those people don't even get frost, or it's really, really late. I wonder if there's just a correlation there.
I think another correlation is the organic matter in the soils. A lot of these coastal plain soil types are really sandy. There's not a lot of organic matter, but you get up in these prairies in the north, that good black dirt, that's going to make a tastier plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So who else has got questions? Austin, are you still there? Are you muted?
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Have you got anything for Stephen?
Well, I was going to talk to him to see, looking back, our green globe variety of turnip is something we've kind of always hung our hat on as being our most cold tolerant Brassica, the one that's probably going to be there the latest in the year as far as its keeping ability and the turnip staying firm and not getting rotten in the ground. And I was going to ask him, and we've talked about this through emails, but just so everybody can hear it, with the new radish we've been working on, what they see with it as start comparing it to other radish varieties from a cold tolerant standpoint, because as we were talking earlier about a lot of the radishes in the daikon family seem to be pretty good early on for a lot of people, really good during the middle part of the season. But as that, really cold weather sets in, that's when you see them start to degrade in quality and kind of wilt on you. And something like our green globe turnip is really just like hitting its stride at that time of year. So, Stephen, what have y'all seen in relationship to cold tolerance on that endurance radish?
Yeah, it's a good question there, Austin, because there's probably, before I touch on the radish comparison with the turnip, I'd probably just talk about the 2 turnip types first. And you're exactly right. The green globe, that's what we call a winter turnip. It's a hard type bulb. We consider it a hard bulb, but early on it's still a soft bulb. But there's 2 types of turnips. There's what we classify as the winter turnip, which green globe has that ability to maintain the bulb. It doesn't rot out, as you said, in the winter months. And then there's the purple top turnips, which in our environment are quite soft bulbs, and they need to be grazed early, and they have no ability to go into the winter months. And so I think it's really important that there's a distinguishing point made between the 2 types of turnip as well. You've got to make sure you get the right type of turnip if you want that forage later in the winter, and green globe's the one that does that really well. So then, to go back to your question about what are we seeing with the endurance radish, and what I would suggest is it will do all of the things that the daikon does early, because it's the radish, and those traits are quite typical of radishes. They're quick out of the ground, they're quite palatable in sort of that early phase. But what we know with the endurance is that it will keep its bulb shape and bulb integrity longer than what some of the daikons do, what those early radishes do. It won't be as late as the green globe turnip for sure, because that's a key distinguishing type. It's a really different type for everything, and it is probably the latest forage you can get. But the endurance will be closer than what the daikon types would be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, guys, look. I'm looking around the room. Laney, you got another question? I don't want to hurt your feelings.
No. I mean, it's just amazing what you can continue to learn about these plants. Plants are, just a very intriguing part of this whole system, and it's just just super cool. So.
Well, Biologic is steeped in science.
No doubt about it. This is the science we always talk about, though, and it's kind of gotten lost over the years. We need to talk about it more. So I'm glad you were here to shed some light on the subject for us, for sure.
We need to go to New Zealand at some point.
We do.
You do.
Yeah. It's my turn, I think.
Yeah, I think it is, brother. I'm with you.
Yeah. It'd be good to see you down there then.
Yeah.
We do need to go to New Zealand.
Do some skydiving. They've got all those.
Turkey hunting.
They've got all those extreme sports in New Zealand.
Eat some venison. Come on.
Water rafting. Yeah.
Hey.
So, Stephen, is there a question about these plants that we should have asked you that we hadn't, or is there something else you can add to help people understand how?
Well, I think one of the really key things is know what you're buying. For somebody planting a food plot is actually take the time to do the research and understand what it is that you actually need and what you're buying. Because there are, as you said at the top of the show, Bobby, there's a lot of brassicas out there. They ain't all the same. There's some big variation in them. There's some that might look good on a piece of paper and might look good in the seed packet, but in the field they're just not fit for purpose. So understand what you're buying. Understand that who's bred it, what it's bred for, is it fit for purpose? That's a really, really key point in my mind, because we see it all too often that people buy something thinking it's fit for purpose and it hasn't been selected for grazing, it hasn't got the ability to tolerate the conditions it's been planted into or whatever. So I think that's a really key message. Yeah.
Fit for purpose. I like it.
Yeah, it really is. So look, Stephen, why don't we've at this point, we always like to have a little fun. We kind of turn it over to Dudley. You might want to just kind of lean back here because he's going to ask you some questions.
We're doing the Springfield rapid fire.
We got some New Zealand stuff and some American stuff here.
Nice.
Stephen's been here enough.
So it's a little thing we do. It's brought to you by our friends at Springfield Army. Lanny, you've got one. Have you had it on your hip the last few days?
And let me tell you what, this thing, that is one heck of a pistol. I'm going to go on and tell you.
Rapid fire.
I mean, I'm glad I hadn't had to use it yet, but
they are nice pistols. So, yeah. So our friend, y'all need to check out Springfield Army. They've got some great pistols. But go ahead, Dudley.
All right.
Does he know the rules? So he's going to give you two, and you can pick one or the other, or say neither.
Yeah, you can say neither if you need to. And forgive me on some of my pronunciation in advance. Okay. All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. L&P or Coca-Cola?
L&P.
Oysters or mussels?
Oysters.
Normal potato fries or Kumara fries?
Kumara fries.
Kumara fries, okay.
I got to write all this stuff down.
North Island or South Island?
South Island, no doubt.
Golden kiwi or regular kiwi?
Ooh, that's a tough one. They're both pretty good, but I'd go golden kiwi. They're not as hairy as the green ones.
American food, grits or oatmeal?
Ooh, oatmeal.
Okay, he doesn't even know. Overall, granular fertilizer or foliar fertilizer?
Oh, they Can I?
You can say both.
I'd say both because they both do different things and they're both appropriate at certain times.
Elk or stag?
Stag.
Saltwater fishing or freshwater fishing?
Fresh.
Clover or brassica?
Ooh, you hit him that's below the belt.
Do I have to answer that one? I'm going to pass that one.
You can pass.
Football or baseball?
Baseball.
Tea, sweet or unsweet? You better answer this right.
Oh, it's hanging on this, is it? The whole day's hanging on this. Unsweetened.
All right.
Go. What is L&P?
Oh, well, it's a famous drink in New Zealand. It's world famous in New Zealand.
You got to have it.
Yeah, it's what's called lemon and pyro.
Huh.
It's sort of just a soft drink.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to have one day.
Yeah.
We got to go to New Zealand.
Yeah, you have to.
I bet we could especially. Maybe we can
Kumara fries.
Yeah.
Kumara.
So those are sweet potato fries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
I actually have a friend who has an Instagram page dedicated to taste testing sweet potato fries.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, cool. Well, Bobby, if you'll quit texting over there.
Yeah. I was looking something up.
Yeah.
So what we've got next, those were good answers. Mac, I want to get you to we've got a question for you, Stephen. One question. If you get this right, we're playing for Fort 258. He's a listener that left a review. So guys, if you want to have a chance to win a prize, you can leave a review for us. But so if you get this right, Fort 258 wins a We've got the Nosler 9th edition reloading manual right there on the table.
On the table.
Yeah, I think that's like,
and we got add-ons this week.
Yeah, well, we've got
a case of Uncle Ray's potato chips.
A whole case?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Mossy Oak.
I may have broken into that this
Did
morning.
you want to eat some of the fries? Golly.
Yeah, I saw him eating some chips.
So we got this boatload of chips promotion going on with Sea-Ark and our friends at Uncle Ray's with the Mossy Oak line of potato chips. So we're going to send potato chips out too.
So, guys, you can go in a convenience store now and find these Uncle Ray's chips that are in Mossy Oak bags.
Yeah, there's Obsessed, there is Bottomland Barbecue, and then there's Cheddar and Jalapeno. So check them out.
Dudley he's got about 3 cases in his office. Stephen, they're all opened. He's just eating out of bags randomly.
But
all the time.
you can find them in the wild. My buddy Hayes sent me a picture of 2 bags of it today from Madison, Mississippi.
Yeah, they're hard to find because they're selling so fast. So grab you some if you can.
Wow.
If he gets it right, there'll be a case of chips go out.
Bobby, what's your favorite of the
which
chips?
flavor though? Yeah,
the Obsessed.
Mine's Obsessed too.
Yeah, all Obsessed.
They're all good.
You mean all dressed?
All dressed. That's what it is. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's all dressed Obsession.
Okay, Mac, you have the question.
I do. All right, Mr. Steven, is there an Old Zealand?
Ooh.
You're from New Zealand.
Yes, there is.
What?
And
There it is. Where is it?
the Netherlands.
Exactly right.
Yeah, it's a region in the Netherlands. Zealand.
Learn something new every day.
So we hear about New Zealand all the
yeah,
time.
I've never heard about Old
Is there an
Zealand.
Old Zealand?
This is. I know you came up with that question.
Yeah, it's a region in the Netherlands, and it's where the one of the explorers, Abel Tasman, who discovered New Zealand, or who came to New Zealand in the early stages. I don't know whether he discovered it, and that's where he was from.
You
Zealand.
probably learned that in 7th grade history class, didn't you?
No, I never did history.
He was in biology class.
So Australia was settled by, if my history is correct, was settled by a bunch of outcasts from England that may have been, prisoners, maybe.
Outlaws, criminals. Yeah.
That's right.
That's
What
all of
about
us in
New
the
Zealand?
South, isn't it?
Where did you guys come from?
Well, a lot of the early settlers were from the UK, from England as well. Yeah. Not criminals though. Not like our Australian cousins.
Well, we're sorry to hear about your queen. That was recently passed away.
Yeah, that was sad for the Commonwealth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
You're so worldly. No, you're not.
Yeah. All that kind of fascinates me. I'd like to go to Europe one day and talk to other gamekeepers over there and see all that.
Bill Gibson just got back.
I got a random text from him last night saying, leaving London. That's all it said. Leaving London. So I guess
he was thinking about you.
He's left London, headed on. I don't think he meant to send that to me.
I just got a text from him that said, in Amsterdam. That's all I got.
What would Bill Gibson be doing in Amsterdam?
Yeah, what's Bill doing in Amsterdam?
I'm sure he's going to museums.
Oh, me. All right, so have we got anything else we need to cover, Stephen? We have.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for what you do for Biologic. No doubt about it. Without what you all provide for us, we wouldn't be here today, so appreciate it.
Yeah, and we appreciate the business we get from you guys and from your customers. I mean, it's really important for us that we connect with our customers and their customers, and this is a great way to do it. So thank you for having me here.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
I'm not even going to ask what we learned because we all learn so much.
No doubt about it.
It really is. And I really think our audience, guys, if y'all are paying attention, you've learned something that you can apply to managing your own properties.
No doubt about it.
And Stephen, you're not trying to sell something. Whenever you're here, you just give the facts, and I really appreciate that. You've always been straight up and honest, and our relationship is just one that we're very proud of.
No doubt about it.
So, yep. All right, guys. So Tuesday nights, the Television Show's still rocking and rolling. We've got a new one coming up, and we've got some stuff that's about to come out with Dr. Harper.
Oh, nice.
Really good stuff. I called him the other day and asked him to do a podcast. And he was like, I'll be glad to. But what about if I come down there and do it in person instead of on the radio? And don't you have some does I could shoot?
Oh, yeah, we do. That's our guy.
I like that.
Out of all the places he could go,
Well, and of course, and so he said, I don't want to sound like I'm inviting myself, but I know
we got a fine crop of does.
Well, he's the kind of biologist / extension. Well, he's our kind of guy. Right?
Oh man, he's so down to earth.
I like it.
Yeah.
So when's he coming?
Well, we're working out the details. So
Sounds good.
our people are talking to his people, and we're making.
We'll
it
get
work
some
out,
does lined up, no problem.
Yep, that's it. So I'm looking at the board. I moved it a little further away, and I can't hardly see it now, but I think that's pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, I wanted to say hello or welcome to, we've got a new guy helping us with the podcast and a bunch of other things around here, Rob Kinney.
Rob Kinney in the house.
The man with 2 first names.
Yeah. Rob and, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
It's not spelled like a first name.
Yeah. Is Rob short for Robert or Robin? Robert.
He said Robert.
Yeah.
Okay.
Robert. Two
Yeah,
Roberts.
2 Roberts in the
we didn't know
house.
that. We should,
Yeah. So I'm just going to call him Redheaded Robert.
Red Robert. No, I got you.
So, Stephen, we're going to go out to dinner tonight at Anthony's, so get ready. It's going to be good.
That's
So,
right.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, guys, I think that's it. I think we lost Austin somewhere along the way. He's probably
Travel safe, Austin.
Yeah, he's upset about missing that deer twice, from what I understand.
Yeah.
So, why don't
That
you,
makes my mess up in Oklahoma a few years ago, I feel a lot better.
What happened there?
I don't want to get into it, but, the time
Yeah, well, just real quick. Give us a 30-second version.
Am I even allowed to talk about this?
Yes.
Well,
If not, we'll cut
I
it
had
out.
a 150-inch deer at about 10 yards and made a bad shot on him. And I felt terrible. I was being filmed and stuff. I'm not a professional hunter. But anyway, 2 nights later,
There's no such thing as a professional.
the deer comes back, walks under the stand, same deer.
Same
and I
spot.
did the exact same thing again.
Repeat.
Yeah, and I've not been invited back on the hunt ever since. And of course, Austin killed like 2 amazing deer just to rub it in.
So the funny thing about that hunt, if I did take another 30 seconds, they sent a text one night where they were staying. There was like a
That air conditioner.
yes, that when you turned it on, it just got louder and louder and louder and
Yeah.
louder. I don't know how y'all slept in that room.
I may have to share that video.
Oh, that thing was serious.
I just laugh every time I see it. That was fun. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah, I don't.
It happens
I don't
to
mess
everybody.
up on a lot of hunts.
Yeah, you just hadn't hunted enough.
Yeah,
if it
hadn't
doesn't-
hunted enough
I've
yet,
never
yeah.
shot one twice. Now, Laney,
I've shot one 7 times.
you never did ask how many times it took me to kill my elk. How many shots? So, all right, guys, why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Mac.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast. And be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.